Good morning, I'm Ronaldo McKenzie, and welcome to another episode of the Neoliberal Round podcast. This morning we discuss reimagining peoples within critical race theory, not thinking race, and moving away from a hero, from a victim, to a hero approach. Again, we discuss today reimagining peoples within critical race theory, not thinking race, and moving away from a victim to a hero approach. So we carried a podcast episode recently talking about how Florida passed a ban on teaching students to feel guilt on history. It was also published as an article in last week's LinkedIn newsletter, The Neoliberal Commentary. I wanted to add another point to the discussion surrounding this issue as we get into the topic of discussion for today. Reimagining peoples within critical race theory, not thinking race, and moving away from a victim to a hero approach. The point is that Florida's ban against teaching students to feel guilt on history seems to be based on bad analysis. Again, Florida's ban against teaching students to feel guilt on history seems to be based on bad analysis, in that it presumes that people aren't responsible for their own emotions or their internal feelings or responses towards external stimuli. The fact is, each person is different and unique, and may have one feeling or reaction towards an external stimulus, which differs from another when exposed to the same stimulus or stimuli. This is where Descartes was useful. When he arrived at cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, pointing out that knowledge of reality is certain because of the inescapable proof of the reality of one's own mind in the very act of doubting one's own existence. This leads to the implication, then, that we can't really know anything outside of our own minds and reality of ourselves. Therefore, and by the way, if you want to explore Descartes' philosophy and principles and his idea of truth or knowledge, as it is pertained to one of his most famous sayings, cogito ergo sum, you could check out the philosophical works of Descartes, which is rendered into English, and it is translated by Elizabeth S. Haldane and G.R.T. Ross in their 1911 works. So we said that this is where Descartes was useful, as it relates to the point that each person is different and unique and may have one feeling or reaction towards an external stimulus which differs from another person when exposed to the same stimulus or stimuli. So we said that this is where Descartes was useful, when he arrived at cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, pointing out that knowledge of reality is certain because of the inescapable proof of the reality of one's own mind in the very act of doubting one's own existence. So this leads to the implication then that we can't really know anything outside of our own minds and reality of ourselves. Therefore, we are only aware of our own feelings and are the only ones who can truly make sense of reality for ourselves. So this band seems to blame, but this band seems to blame the truth of history contained in lessons that is actually on schools' curricula or business programs aimed at developing diversity among their students and staff respectively. However, based on the subjective understanding of reality described by Descartes, we cannot assume a feeling for others because we are outside of their realities or the realities of individuals, and individuals have minds that express a subjective understanding of the experience of a particular reality or stimuli within their reality. Again, I am saying here that we cannot assume a feeling for others, which is what this ban is doing, because we are outside of their realities, and individuals have minds that impress a subjective understanding of the experience of a particular reality or stimuli within their reality. Therefore, an experience and or feelings of guilt make up an individual's personality and subjective understanding of reality. The ban assumes an experience on everyone and comes to a conclusion about a personal response. Further, if people feel guilty from exposure to stimuli, isn't this a normal human response given the fact that we have consciences and rationality based on our human consciousness and therefore an idea of justice, fairness, and discrimination? Further, this ban gives students tremendous authority over the classroom and learning, for any student can now say they feel guilt from any lesson in history that is taught. Again, let me say this again. This ban, this ban gives students tremendous authority over the classroom and learning, for any student can now say they feel guilt from any lesson in history that is taught. This brings me to the topic for today. Reimagining peoples within critical race theory, not thinking race, and moving away from a victim to a hero approach. And this is very important because I'm going to delve into it a little bit, and I'm going to lift up some thinkers, some black scholars, and various scholars who are important to when we start thinking about this. This is very important. And I'm going to repeat this again. Reimagining peoples within critical race theory, not thinking race, and moving away from a victim to a hero approach. Now, this connects to the issue of the dynamics of humanity as we look at privilege and power and solutions to the problems and challenges these pose for society. I have said that putting people in race is dangerous and disastrous. It constantly puts people against each other. Further, it is important to point out here that there is no race only a human race. Race is a human conception or creation that came about around the 16 to the 1700s, just about the same time that Europe was about to embark on the most heinous and inhumane project, the enslavement of a black race or the slave trade. There was never any race, just so you know, only a human race, which distinguishes humans from other beings or species. The argument or theory about races within the human race was proven to be a useful discovery and tool, as it provided an acceptable argument that a civilized society based on laws and faith would want to use to justify the creation of a society based on race. What am I saying here? And I'm going to repeat that again. I said the argument or theory about races within the human race was proven to be a useful discovery and tool, as it provided an acceptable argument that a civilized society based on laws and faith would use to justify the creation of a society based on race. What I'm saying here is there is no way that the elites could go back to their peoples in Europe, to the religious leaders and to their civil society, and would convince them that they would enslave an entire set of people and treat them the way they treated them. There is no way, because there would have been a backlash. So what happened was that the theory that was developed that was said to be scientific at just so you know, it was developed on the fringes. It was not useful until when it was found, when it was discovered, when this particular theory was discovered by the elites. And of course, they thought it was a useful justification to want to enslave and treat as nothing, as savages, as less than human black people from the continent of Africa. And just so you know, the same method was used to augment Christianity when St. Augustine's Confessions was discovered as a useful tool to form the foundational principles of Christianity, as it agreed with, supported, and made the Christian faith exceptional during the race for a dominant religion. And we will have a separate discussion about that. And I am developing an argument, and if you visit my rmckenzie.academia.edu site, academic site, where I flesh out some of my work, my research and my work and principles in a more academic way, I discuss in a 40-page paper the issue of privilege, power, status, and the dynamics of society. And I talk about the development of Western civilization. And if you look at the development of Western civilization from Homer and Herodotus all the way up, contained in those principles and writings was a propensity for man to want to privilege a particular way. Or over time, people came to develop some kind of normative understanding of historical literature that was never meant to be normative for society, but was a perspective. But we will have to continue that discussion for another podcast presentation. But we want to continue the discussion here as it relates to reimagining peoples, because I'm going somewhere with this. I'm going somewhere with this argument. I'm going somewhere reimagining people, reinventing peoples, and moving away from thinking about race. So I'm going somewhere with this, and it is to look at the whole idea of race and turn it on its head for what it is: a fake and a false idea. And then we can move towards showing you how throughout history human beings have this strategic way of utilizing various methods to advance a particular behavior or act, or to justify. So when we think about this theory about races within the human race, in the sense that it was proven to be a useful discovery and tool because it provided an acceptable argument that a civilized society, a civilized Europe, based on laws and faith, would want to use to justify the creation of a society based on race. Here I'm saying that at best it was an extreme way of justifying the slave trade so as to satisfy some greed, which was to maximize profit with the cheapest labor or cost. The race to profit from having a monopoly on sugar and growing spices in the Caribbean required a large and flexible, hard, and a willing, complicit labor force that could be controlled at lowest cost possible. European elites had already realized that they could not rely on their own countrymen, given the type of labor required and the health risks involved in doing so. Because we know that already a group of Europeans, Christopher Columbus, and had started to settle in the New World, in what we know as the New World, the Americas, including the Caribbean, and started settling in the New World. And many of them died from various diseases, and the population, the natives in these places, some of them, especially within Jamaica and some of the smaller Caribbean islands, some of the global south, they committed genocide. The Indians on the global plane, and some of them, their resistance was to commit genocide. I mean, sorry, not to commit. Many of them committed suicide. I apologize. They killed themselves, or some of them were raped and mistreated and eventually killed. And so we know that there was no population or peoples there within these places to work the population, to work the plantation, or to do the kind of work, or to provide the kind of labor resource that was necessary. So as such, they had to come up with the idea which turned into a plan to enslave a set of people from Africa who they would objectify through a false theory of science about the biology of peoples to justify their plan and strategy. The elites, and of course the nobles, they formed part of the elites across Europe. The nobles and the monarchy and so on. The elites knew that they could not have undertaken such a daring and heinous plan fearing backlash from the pious and their civilized society. So they engineered a plan that has been working against peoples, denigrating a set of human beings into a set of savages via scientific means, and then justifying using those so-called savages on religious means. That was at best a forced reading of the scriptures to justify a practice. And just so you know, you people are, and you just so you know what, some black men and women and some peoples, but because of what I'm talking about, say for example, Kyrie Irving refuses to believe the science behind the science behind the vaccine, and refuses to be vaccinated against COVID because he doesn't trust the science behind it. And you understand, you see why some people would not trust science, because science has been used, especially biology, to support a particular strategy that would lead to the creation of a society based on race, and then develop the slave trade, and then treat them as savages and livestock. So that, I have discussed or said it in previous writings, that is why some people are suspicious, and people should not get angry or mad when persons speak out against the science behind COVID because of the precedents, because of track records. And so one have to be fair, and that is why I say to everyone, we have to understand where people are coming from. We have to have an open mind, and we have to work together, and we have to understand where people are coming from, the place they are, where is that behavior coming from, and then we have to get deep we have to connect with people on a deeper level and understand their behavior. So indeed, race was and still is a strategy that was useful to create a society whereby that society could justify and feel good about its abuses, injustices, and victimization of another set of people, so as to realize its greed for maximum and supernormal profit. Profit, which black peoples were never and are not allowed to access, because they were treated like livestock that do not matter or do not have value or use for money or profit. Therefore, as a progressive and advanced society that is more aware of the truth, we should now move away from thinking in terms of race as it was a useful strategy for a backward society driven by greed and a competitive drive for dominance, which created a society based on race to facilitate the application of an economic system that was heavily invested in the slave trade. I'm going to say this again. Therefore, America, as a progressive and advanced society, or whatever society, wherever you are today in the world, as a progressive and advanced society that is more aware of the truth, we should now move away from thinking in terms of race as it was a useful strategy for a backward society driven by greed and a competitive drive for dominance, which created a society based on race to facilitate the application of an economic system that was heavily invested in the slave trade. Now, according to Andrew Curran, the author of The Anatomy of Blackness, Science and Slavery in an Age of Enlightenment, and more recently, Diderot and the Art of Thinking Freely, and he's also the William Armstrong Professor of the Humanities at Wesleyan University, in an article in the Times entitled "Facing America's History of Racism Requires Facing the Origins of Race as a Concept." He says this, and I quote, "Racialized thinking, especially when weaponized by our politicians, must be repudiated at every turn. Part of an effective rebuttal to such malicious positions may come from extending our understanding of racism to include the anecdotal, spurious, and pseudoscientific birth of these ideas centuries ago. This may ultimately be something that every American can agree on." Again, he says this may ultimately be something that every American can agree on wherever we come from. We are all the unfortunate heirs of a deadly and illegitimate science. We are all, black people and white people, we are all the unfortunate heirs of a deadly and illegitimate science. However, I will go further than Andrew and add, not only are we to face race as a concept, because he entitled his argument, as I said earlier, he entitled his argument saying this: "Facing America's history of racism requires facing the origins of race as a concept." Facing the origins of race as a concept. But I am saying here, not only are we to face race as a concept, but also see it as a strategy within a context of greed and unfair and reckless gain. Strategy is evident in politics, business, international relations, and even within colonialism and how those societies were conquered and developed. Even their independence is strategically engineered. And many of these islands are even unaware of that, especially those who had a ceremonial transition. Again, strategy is evident in politics, business, international relations, and even within colonialism and how those societies were conquered and developed. In fact, Andrew goes on to say in the Times article I referenced above that the histories of slavery and racism in the United States have never been more pertinent. This is also the case for the comparatively understudied history of race as a concept, without which it is impossible to understand how Europeans and their colonial descendants in the United States engineered the most complete and enduring dehumanization of a people in history. The logic behind the history of race initially seems deceivingly clear: to justify the forced deportation of 400,000 black Africans to North America and another 11 million to other parts of the Americas between 1525 and 1866. Europeans and their American heirs found it necessary to debase and revile their captives. Yet today's racism is more than a malignant byproduct of the 19th century American plantation system. It also grew out of an elaborate and supposedly scientific European conception of the human species that began during the Enlightenment. Now, and just so you know, I don't even know how it can begin in the Enlightenment. If it began in the Enlightenment, if we are being enlightened, I thought we should be. That means we're coming to know the truth, and obviously, we weren't. The world was definitely not going through enlightenment when it started to develop or accept this theory of the human race as having within the human race there are races, and using certain biology and certain means to force ripen apple, so to speak. So there was never a race, and it has been the belief, even among many black and white Americans, that black peoples in Africa at one time had slaves and enslaved their own brothers and sisters. But this is not true, because Africans who negotiated their life away to the Europeans who outsmarted them, the Africans never thought of themselves in terms of or identified as any one race of black people. They were states, tribal states, as much as the Europeans were citizens of nation states or monarchies. And here when you hear I use the word African states, talking about the 1600s and so on, we have a tendency to describe these states, so peoples as being in tribes or okay. But when we talk about Europe, we talk about nations and states. Just as though we talk about the third world and we talk about first world. Language is important because language helps to condition a particular idea. And when we talk about tribe is a disrespect. We are disrespecting these African nations, treating them as, oh, they never had a nation. They don't have nations. They have their tribe, because the word tribe suggests a primitive idea, suggests something primitive, something that is less than developed, something that is less than. So when you talk about tribes, so when we talk about African states, talking about back in just before slavery and up to that time, we refer to them as tribes. But when we talk about Europe, we talk about nations and states and countries. And we want to move away from that. Just as though we want to move away from thinking about the global south or developing countries as third world, as if they are third, conditioning our minds to think in terms of first, second, and third. So we want to move away from that. And we want to be more politically correct, I guess, or diplomatic, so as to condition the right kind of idea and condition the right kind of feelings. So, okay, so I'm saying to you here that, and also I'm saying to you that for those people who believe that Africans enslave their own people, I'm saying to you that it is not true, because Africans who negotiated their life away to the Europeans who outsmarted them never thought of themselves in terms of or identified as any one race of black people. They were states or tribal as much as the Europeans were citizens of nation states or monarchies. There were fierce fighting and wars between these African states, tribes, for dominance, and various African states did enslave their captives. However, the slavery practiced was not the kind or on the elaborate scale as the slave trade. Certainly, the Africans allowed their drive for power to be their downfall. The Europeans made deals to give the African states or tribes guns for slaves. The Africans were more than happy, as they thought that they could now dominate the other states or tribes, but the Europeans made the same deal with all the other states, African states. In the end, the Europeans facilitated the demise of Africa and were able to penetrate the region for a time. The Europeans realized that they had a huge market for sugar and that the tropics and the New World could provide tremendous opportunities for cultivating products such as sugar that had a growing demand that was exploding. The race was on to monopolize sugar, and having a cheap slave labor force that ensures this was what they could have come up with. So the issue of race is a construction that served a particular purpose in history, which at this moment in time should be at least made obsolete, as it is backward thinking. In fact, just as we can place a ban on teaching students to feel guilt on history, we can place a ban on teaching a false theory about race. In fact, and moreover, if we are to truly resolve the issues of race, such as the feelings of guilt from teaching or talking about an unpleasant past, we may find that the better answer is in teaching a united race instead of races. But we are conditioned in various ways in our society today to continue to think in racial terms. All the applications, when you apply for certain jobs and certain positions and whatever they are always asking you, and when you do censuses and so on, they are always asking you about your race, so that we can continue to think about race. Further, just as Florida is trying to deal with the issue of guilt through bans that only breeds more racial tension and suspicion, while its society face practices of discrimination, there are those who are putting out projects and works that reimagine the way we view slaves or people in history. They are moving away from the victim approach to the hero approach, so that black people can have a positive image of themselves in history instead of a negative one or a defeated one. This is another way we deal with emotional issues surrounding the problem of race stemming from the past. Ultimately, it is by moving away from racial thinking or a society of race that we will engender true healing. Again, ultimately, it is by moving away from racial thinking or a society of race that we will engender true healing, for then it would be a society of love. And that is the greatest miracle. Furthermore, when we can work together to deal with scars of the past without politicizing it, can we truly strengthen our race relations and unite a nation. Again, when we can work together to deal with scars of the past without politicizing it, can we truly strengthen our race relations and unite a nation and the people and the world. How do we do this? A solution to consider is to move away from racial thinking, yet we are conditioned to think in those terms, even in today's world. But what purpose does that serve? Moreover, and importantly, another way we can develop a more united human race, which was the original intention, is for black and brown peoples to begin to move away from thinking about their past with a defeatist and victim mentality. Again, importantly, another way we can develop a more united human race, which was the original intention, is for black and brown people to begin to move away from thinking about their past with a defeatist and victim mentality. That seems to be the recommendation of new black scholars who are trying to reimagine and reinvent the slave in history. And so I want to lift up Dana Berry's book, Price for Their Pound of Flesh. Price for Their Pound of Flesh. Some time ago, I was rapping with, and just so you know, some time ago I was rapping with a fraternal brother of mine from Phi Beta Sigma, a line brother of mine from Phi Beta Sigma, about the book, Price for Their Pound of Flesh, written by Dana Berry. In preparation for a presentation I had to deliver at a class at Georgetown University on said book, exploring Berry's efforts to reimagine and reinvent the black slave within America's slave history. I concluded that Berry does a very good job in her book to lay out her argument. Now, so the impromptu rap session that I had is worth sharing, and I recorded, transcribed, and edited the discussion to only include my raw, unedited, and uncanny analysis. The discussion was captured in 2 separate takes, recording 1 and recording 2, which I am going to share with you I'm going to share with you now. So I'm going to take a break, and the next segment I will share with you recording 1 of a discussion I had in preparation for a presentation I had at Georgetown University. I was having just a general discussion with one of my fraternity brothers, which I thought, and which I recorded, and I thought it was very interesting, and I wanted to share that with you as part of today's podcast. So I will share that with you after this. Thank you for supporting us, and I hope that you are enjoying and you find interesting some of the comments. I think some of the discussions here, they are worth exploring within all fora, and because it is part of strengthening the human race as a people. Thank you so much for listening, and the next take you hear will be the recording. Thank you so much. What makes her unique is that she's using a modern day concept. What makes Dana Berry so unique is that she's using a modern day concept to describe the issue of slavery.
Okay.
Within capitalism.
Okay.
And she does a very good job, in a sense, in using or mirroring other disciplines to talk about,
such as what?
Slavery. Say, for example, criminalization or the issue of rape. Mm-hmm. There is now we are here, and especially with the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, there is this issue where the victims are rising up. In fact, in the Me Too movement, what was more important is that people have a tendency to look at the raper or the rapist, but not the victim. The victim, and in many cases,
that's what a lot of the major crimes.
Right, and they always talk about they don't talk. It's like every time somebody commit a crime or affects another person, they talk. It's as if the attention is on who? Not the victim, on the perpetrator. Right, and in a sense, it re-victimized the victim, because you just to hear that it's as if the victim is always described in light of the act and in light of the perpetrator. And there is this new thing now in criminology. So
Barry is bringing this point around to slavery.
Yes, and that's one thing I didn't bring in class, because she wants this victim mentality. She wants to move away from the victim mentality. Yes, the victim mentality.
What is the victim mentality in slavery? Can you explain?
Not victim mentality. That's what every time people talk about slavery, when historians they talk about the slave as property, the slave as valuable, only insofar as he's valuable to somebody else, to the white man, to his owner, and he's valuable based on his work, based on the external conception of himself. And every time you talk about slavery, it's always a bad experience, or you talk about it within a particular. So she wants to move away from that. She said, yeah, we know that was bad. I want to look at the victim now. I want to look at the slave, the mind of the slave.
Okay.
In a sense, and then she talks about her childhood in the beginning of the book, and how her parents made a concerted effort to take them hiking and to teach them that they have a strong lineage, and that influenced her.
That is her conclusion. Like, because I was wondering, what is her conclusion, and like, what does she want to accomplish, or what does she want to learn in studying the victim?
Well, no, the thing is, it's not she studied. She just wants history. Not only, she don't want a history only based on degrading the slave, because it also helps to, what we say, continue the victimization of the victim. Yeah, in other words, so when black people see themselves, they see themselves as a victim, or they see themselves as a slave, because outside, we are all, and when you think, because you don't know where you're going until you talk about your foundation, talk about your lineage, talk about your past, all you think about is property. But you think about that property because you're thinking about it in the eyes of the white man. You think about it as property because you're thinking about it in the eyes of the white man. But what about thinking about the enslaved in the eyes of the enslaved? Now, how do they feel? How do they think about themselves? And now she writes about, she presents a myriad of stories from Africans who they documented from archives, and they're talking, and she talk about how, and she show how they value themselves, the kind of value that they place on themselves through rebellion and through various things that they were able to, because they value themselves. So she's trying to reimagine and reinvent the black man, not just looking at the black man in the eyes of the white man, the external conception of himself, but also want to look at the internal, look at the black man himself, how he sees himself. And let us run with that. Let us celebrate that as well. And that is what she is aiming to do. And I don't think our professors looked at it discussed it in that lens. She discussed it in some other lens, but I did my departure. Because if you read Dana Berry's opening remarks and the author's note, she makes a concerted effort to talk about her upbringing and how her family were professors, and they did not see race because they lived in a community of people who were professors and teachers and lawyers, and probably it was maybe segregated too, but they were necessarily not, but they were all educated black people who made a concerted effort to empower their children by not feeding them the external history, but more the internal one. Okay, so that they now can not see themselves as slaves or carry themselves, they can see themselves. In other words, she is on an empowerment journey. She's trying to empower the slave. She's trying to empower the black man. Okay, and the thing is, look at her method. She used slaves. In her book, it's riddled with just, it's so refreshing. I can't remember reading a book one day when I'm looking at history and slavery, and it's not written by a white man, or written by a man who talk about what white people say about black people and how it happened and what happened. But what about our feelings and how we thought of ourselves and the value we placed in ourselves? And then she said, no. And then and the fact that she said the slave has a soul, that is what separates. And then that's what separates the slave from an actual livestock. But slaves were treated as livestocks. as if they do not have a soul. That's the point she's making here. They were treated as livestock, as if they have a soul. But guess what? Black people have soul, and they demonstrated that too. And she showcased various points in history, in the life cycle of a slave, where they demonstrated that soul value. So, and I don't think the professor was owning in on that. And I'm gonna talk about this a little bit and push back on that a bit, because that is that's my take on the issue here. That and I say that she's making a purely an accounting argument, not an economic argument, because she talks about appreciation and depreciation, not in those exact terms. But in other words, she defines it. She describes that concept when you look at how slaves were approached. Okay, at various life cycles of a slave development. Okay, their asset value is either appreciated or depreciated. And when they get to the old age, then you sell them off, okay, and they go in the woods, whatever. You don't care about them anymore. You dispose of the asset. They were treated like that as well. Okay, so now she's in a sense, as I said, she's trying to reinvent the slave, the enslaved, the black man, so that you look at the slave not just in terms of how he was seen by the white, but how he was seen by himself, and what he did, yes, to protect his individuality over and against yes, the white man's conception of the black man's self. And by the way, she's also making a psychological argument. She used a lot of psychology in the book, because she talks about the life cycle of a slave. Like, you talk life cycle. In social psychology class, talk about Erik Erikson talks about and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yes, and Kohlberg, they talk about the cycle, and Sigmund Freud talks about the psychological development that people go through. But Sigmund Freud is more looking at it from a consciousness level, while Erik Erikson looks at more developmentally. And she looks at from 0 to 5 and 6 to 11, and she does that in the book, because the value of the slave changes based on his different life cycles.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that is very interesting.
And so
that makes sense too.
And so she's using psychology as well. She uses that method. You know why I think she's done in doing that?
Why?
Because psychology, the realm of, when you talk about value or self-value or self-concept, because her argument is really looking at self-concept and self-esteem and empowerment. Okay? Self-esteem, psychology studies self-esteem and your self-concept of yourself. Okay, and we talk about, and when you look at psychology, look at the self, you look at we compartmentalize ourselves. You have the real self, you have the imagined self, and you have the self. In a sense, she's talking about, so she's using a psychological argument to make her case as well. Okay, and she does a very good job in terms of piecing the book together, and you have to see that. But she's definitely making an accounting term. She's definitely using psychology and developmental psychology and accounting to shape her argument and to present her. Okay, but it's really interesting, powerful. And there's one powerful and striking thing as I read the book. In the beginning of the book, she quoted in the introduction, she quoted a slave. She quoted a lot of slaves, that's one of the things I like about it. It's just the book is bereft with slave quotes. Or
bereft.
Yes, it's just riddled with, you have so I didn't even know that there were so many documents. Before this class, I did not know that slaves spoke. Actually, yes, I did. In New York, this teacher gave me a big encyclopedia of a book from the 1800s where slaves were writing letters and I'm like, what? They had a mind?
I was just about to say they could read, they could write.
Yes, read and write, and one of them was quoting Shakespeare, and she does that. I'm telling you, she's trying to reimagine the slaves. We weren't always dumb. Or we weren't, or whatever, not dumb. So we weren't just No good. That's just why we were great people who had a sense of self and all of that.
Yes.
That is what she's getting, and she does a very good job in doing that. She's not making the
Is
art.
This is Dana Barry.
Dana Barry, yeah, she's a woman. She's a black woman, and not only that. Oh, thank you for telling me. She's a woman, yes.
Of course, she's a woman.
But what separates Dana Barry's work here from any other work? Also, because here am I talking about, she's reimagining. She's trying to reinvent the black man or the enslaved, so that they know that, she's trying to, so that they know, to come to an understanding.
Separates Dana Barry from.
So that they know that they have a value.
That's what separates her.
Another thing is that I believe she's feminist. She writes another book about I borrowed a book from the library. You were there. About a woman of color, the importance of the woman, the black woman in American history. And then, if you read many of the history books about slavery, men have a primordial position in these books. It's always the man, the mandingo. There's an emphasis on the man. But here is it. She not only emphasizes the man, but in a sense, she makes a concerted effort to emphasize and to lift up in fact, she have a whole chapter on the woman. Okay? She has a whole chapter on the woman, and she looks at how slavery was only able to be extended because of the woman's uterus. She look at the value of the woman's uterus, okay, and how it extended slavery. And then she also talk about American slaves that were born here in America, and slaves that came from the mainland, from Africa, or the Caribbean, because slaves came in from the Caribbean too, which is what many people didn't know. That's why many of us are related. Some of the black people here are related to some of the black people that were in the Caribbean, because there was a lot of mix-up. Some of them, but we don't know who is who, and some of them some of them came from Caribbean and here as well. Okay, but she talks about the woman. So not only is her book is doing. Please remember that she's writing this book was written last year. Well, she finished the book last year or something like that. What was going on last year? The Me Too, and the year before, the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter movement, giving voice to the voiceless, giving voice to the victim. Okay. In other words, reinventing the victim, and not just talking about the predator or the perpetrator, but the victim as well, those who are disadvantaged and so on. And she is doing that. So of course, she does a very good job in talking about women, because women are usually left out. Women are usually not, and so she is also looking at the importance of the woman as, in terms of not just her external value, because she talks about that, but also her internal. In fact, her internal value, her self-value is powerful, because she was the one. She showed many instances how the woman was fighting. To protect her kids, So, and there's one instances where one woman was almost raped in another book. One book she didn't talk about that, and she was so upset because she recognized her value in Warren's book. And she tells the story of a woman who's about to be raped, and she was more upset about being raped, and she said she seemed to be more upset about being raped than than being enslaved. But in a sense, this also speaks of her. She's not that she wasn't upset, okay, but she's just as upset, I think. But here is it that she's about to be raped, and she's like, how could you do such a thing? So she has value. To the external man, she's just property, but to her, to the woman, she's human. And that's what Dana Barry does. How do I sound? How does that sound?
It sounds good.
Sounds good?
Yeah.
Okay, pause. there's one more thing that I must add. As I read Dana's book, she does something really interesting here. She talks about the fact that she didn't see race. In other words, a public and a private self until she goes to school, or in the public. That's when, and then her friends treated her with disdain, because in a sense she was living a segregationist life. That's my criticism of her book.
Say it again.
My criticism of her book was that she said she didn't see race. Okay, only until she, within the private self, within people of her own peers and or people that look like her and so on. But when she moved beyond that as a child and went to a certain school, it was different. And then she says they would look down on her with pity. And then when she finally went to school to go to college, and it was just different, she felt good. In a sense, I think she has to be careful here, because she seemed to be now celebrating segregation. Because now you can have an argument. Well, okay, see, that's why we said segregation was okay, because the black man can identify with his own people, yes, and in a sense, and can get a sense of his own worth and his own value amongst his own people, but not outside of that. And so therefore, that is one of my criticisms of her, that this whole issue of value and the fact that it brings into question the whole issue of segregation and integration, because she seemed to make an argument that segregation gave her this false sense of self, because she was looked down up. Her self-value was in jeopardy or challenged by the external value of the other. When she went to school, she felt intimidated by those who pitied her for being black. And then when she lived in her community, her parents did everything in their powers to ensure that she had a very strong conception of herself, driven by a history not that was from the bottom down up, but from the top down. Not one of victimization, okay, but one that celebrates the soul, one that celebrates the indomitability of the black woman and the black man and the slave, and what they were able to go through and do, and what they did to preserve themselves, and So it is within our own black community that we find escape. So why did we fight? Why are we fighting against integration? Why is integration so bad if Dana Barry here is lifting up the idea that celebrates?
Integration.
Not the implication. Sorry, she's not really lifting up the idea, but the implication of her argument would seem to suggest that black people would feel well among themselves than with outside. So therefore, they should allow themselves. They should not integrate. They should stay within their own community, so they don't have to feel discriminated against, and so on and so forth. If that is her argument, so but then of course, that's one of the arguments. So she has to be careful about that, and has to put it in a broader perspective that does not defeat where we are so far in terms of integration, and so on. So the next point I thought that she made, that was, well, this is not a critique, but a critique of U.S. policy, or not just U.S. policy, post-industrial policy, of the policy, or the argument that would suggest that you cannot reparate or compensate slaves for their past, work and labor.
Because they say it's a lot of arguments today.
Because if you have all those records and archives that are available, yes. And by the way, and that's an argument from convenience. Just so you know that people who were the slave, let me tell you, after slavery, people who lost the value of slaves were compensated. You hear me? They were compensated.
That's right.
Yes, you lose a slave, that you're insured against a loss of property. Okay? But not the slave. You're free and so on, and okay, you will not get back any money that from your ancestors who've worked to toil to build up this country. It will not work. They lost the war. Okay, they lost the war, the race. Yes?
Yes.
They lost the race, and we are complicit in accepting it. In closing, and to wrap up, what is the ultimate of all things and the greatest miracle? What is the ultimate of all things and the greatest miracle? The ability to live as one. For our unity is our strength. And this facilitates progress and development. We are not talking about a unity where we are all identical, but one of diversity, whereas we are all members of the human race. We are not one, but unique, which adds to the beauty of life. For life can be colorful, as the universe exudes colors of all types, everything working in balance. So let us abandon race, while working to heal the scars that race has inflicted on those who still bear its painful past. But we are conditioned to constantly think in racial and categorical terms, which find support in false science, and yet, we continue to base our societies on such a science. How then can we trust science and any society that holds on to vestiges of the past that strategically and systematically denigrate a set of human beings? So that we can continue privilege, or to promote an unequal society with poor and rich peoples, with variations in between. References and further reading concerning this particular article is available if you go to the neoliberal commentary in my LinkedIn at reverendronaldo.c.mckenzie. And just so you know, you could refer to Dana Berry's book, Price for Their Pound of Flesh. It was published by in Boston by Beacon Press in 2017, and it is available, I think, also in audiobook and in the Kindle, and also in paperback, and you can actually also at Amazon. And just so you know, I quoted Andrew Coran's article, Facing America's History of Racism Requires Facing the Origins of Race as a Concept. It was published in the Times, July 10, 2021 at 2:01 p.m. You can check that out. And if you would like more information on Descartes' epistemology, you can read Descartes' Epistemology, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. You could also check out Eric Erickson's Identity and the Life Cycle, published by W.W. Norton and Company in 1994. If you want to read about civilization and its discontent as it relates to issues of consciousness and so on, you could check out Sigmund Freud's work, Civilization and Its Discontent, published by W. W. Norton and reprinted in 2010. There is a book that you might find, or a reading that you might find interesting. It says, How History Textbooks Reflect America's Refusal to Reckon with Slavery. Again, there is a material that you might find useful. How History Textbooks Reflect America's refusal to reckon with slavery. And you could go to www.vox.com/identities/slavery-textbooks-history. And then you could also check out my book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance, published in 2021 in Charlotte, North Carolina by Palmetto Publishers. And some of the concepts I lift up here are also contained in my book. So you may want to check my book out, which is also available in all platforms and also on the audiobook, on the Audible. You can, and it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or you could just also check out my book signing, which is coming up in Germantown if you're in the area. On April 2, I will have books available and I will be signing, and I may have some time to also speak with you or drink or grab a coffee and let's talk about some of these issues. There's also the Journal of Negro History, Volume 10, published by the Association for the Study of Negro History, and this is from about 1848. It has letters and documents written by slaves from about 1848 up to about 1925. There is also another material you might find interesting, Accounting for Slavery, Masters and Management, written by Caitlin Rosenthal. It's a book that was published by Harvard University Press in 2019, and it's about accounting for slavery. And that's a quite interesting book. There's also a handbook of personality psychology. I dealt with the issue of self-concept and self-image in two of the recordings where I shared with you, or that I was rapping in. So you may, or if you want further reading on the issue of personality psychology, you could check out the handbook of personality psychology, published by Academic Press in 1997. By the editors are Robert Hogan, John Johnson, and Stephen Briggs. There is also a book that speaks to slavery that when you look at books, when you begin to review and to explore books like The Price for Their Pound of Flesh, Dana Berry, you want to read other books as well surrounding the issue, such as Wendy Warren's New England-Bound Slavery and Colonization in Early America, published by Live Right Publishing Corporation, 2017. There's also Richard Watson, Cogito Ergo Sum, The Life of René Descartes. You may find that interesting, published in 2007 by David R. Godine Publishers. And finally, you could also want to check out Piaget's Theory of Cognitive and Affective Development, published by Pearson's College in 2003, written by Barry Wedgeworth. Again, if you want to read more on cognitive and affective development, you can check out Piaget's Theory of Cognitive and Affective Development by Pearson College. Thank you. This is where I will leave you for today's discussion, and I have said much, and of course we need to continue. Wherever you are, in your homes, in your car, or wherever you are, these are some of the discussions we will have to have at the coffee shop and at the bars and in churches and in the boardrooms and so on and so forth, as we seek to develop the human race, as we seek to develop and to move beyond our scars and to move beyond our past, and to do it with class and dignity, with truth and honesty, and dealing with it effectively. I pray and hope that you will continue to follow and to support this program, subscribe to it, and whatever podcast platform you're listening on, and also follow me on Twitter, Ronaldo McKenzie, or on Facebook, Ronaldo.McKenzie. And also you can subscribe to the article that deals with this very particular issue and leave a comment at the Neoliberal Commentary on my LinkedIn, Reverend Ronaldo C. McKenzie. Thank you so much. And please, I hope to see you all, if you can, I hope to see you all at my book signing on April 2 at the Germantown Espresso Bar, right at the Maplewood Mall, right by Germantown Avenue and Shelton. Take care, and I continue to encourage you to support Ukraine. And just so you know, I have not talked about Ukraine, but probably sometime tomorrow or later on, I will give you an update. But I did publish a recent blog concerning the war. There were two things we discussed. America's on the war. Some are against the huge Ukraine relief, given the U.S. own problems with poverty and lack. That's one story I published on March 19, 2022 in ronaldocmckenzie.blogspot.com. And I also had update on that very same day at 12:36. I had also published an update on the Russian-Ukrainian war entitled "Russia Wants Ukraine to Withdraw Its Intentions of Joining NATO. Ukraine Rejects Proposal, and Rightly So." I'll explain. You can check that out. And you could also check out the update I have as it relates to what Americans are saying. And probably I may just lift up a little bit. Of course, some Americans, especially African Americans in Philadelphia, whose city is beset by rising poverty, falling incomes, and homelessness among younger peoples, and are reeling from a drug epidemic that destroyed towns like the one shown in the cover image, Kensington, Philadelphia, suffering from deindustrialization. Many are against this $12.1 billion package because they say, what about poor people here in this country, in the US? They say, it's too much. That's from several conversations I have had among 20 city residents, especially African American males 25 and older in Philadelphia. But they also say they can't. They say that they can't do without Russian products and forced business. I apologize about that. I think I just noticed that there's an error here. I said, but these very same people who are against it say that they can't do without Russian products and forced business. They have desires that must be fulfilled. However, these arguments contradict themselves. They make a moral argument and then make an amoral one based on greed. First of all, what's the highest ethic, I ask? Isn't it to preserve life? Doing what we can to save a life? Secondly, just because we have needs in our life, does that preclude us from helping others? If helping was based on not having any needs, then no one would have gotten ahead in life. Thirdly, if people are in need, then we shouldn't make it an issue when we are engaged with resolving our concerns, as if to say we can't resolve a problem without clearing all the other problems we have in our lives. It's selfish and does not take into account the other life or life. Further, every issue should be tackled on their own merits. If there are poor Americans, then we should deal with that issue without using it as a sticking point when considering other matters. So one can imagine the complications of dealing with this. And fourthly, in a sense, the relief is a way to appease the soul. For in a way, the US has helped to finance Russia's war with the continued business links and connections that provide Putin with the resources to invade. If we believe in reparations, then we cannot oppose this $12.1 billion and rising relief by the US. And when I talk about reparations, because I was speaking here to the African American community, who I'm saying to that if we believe in reparations, then we cannot oppose this. So, but that probably is a far-fetched point. But that was a quick update, a discussion I had with somebody in the community, and I constantly seek out individuals in my community to pick their brain and their minds to find out What makes them tick? How are people in society, in community today? How are they thinking? And so on and so forth. And I with what I do, I'm able to engage with people in society on the ground a lot. So it's really interesting. So, but thank you so much. You can check that story out on my Blogger News. I continue to have problems with the neoliberal.com. I am still unable to upload or to connect my website to the particular platform that gives me control to manage it, to be able to add new stuff and to reorganize it. But we're still working on it. I'm trying to work with the people at Bluehost and WordPress to resolve a major technical issue that I'm having with our website. But as soon as we're able to resolve the neoliberal.com, but continue to check me out on rmckenzie.academia.edu, and I will also have this discussion available on that particular platform. Take care and have a great day. And until our next show, please listen to the other programs that you haven't heard on this show and continue to send feedback. Take care.